little meditation. Can the people online hear okay? Check. Yeah, okay, good. Got a better setup for you this week. Um, do a little bit of meditation. I'll provide some guidance, more at the beginning, less at the end. Then I'm going to continue the reflections on the teachings of not self, do a little review and move into the next segment of that teaching. Um, I think I'd like to make some sound as a way of transitioning into stillness. Um, if you've sat with me before, my favorite sound is the vooing or the sound of a foghorn. And this is actually a practice that activates the vagus nerve and kind of puts us in a state of relaxation. And the way it works is we'll all take a deep breath, kind of like the deepest breath of the day, if you will, and then slowly let the air out with the sound of a foghorn, which I'll demonstrate. And the idea is that because we will all need to take a breath at different places, that the sound will kind of hang in the air. Uh, and the invitation is just to let the awareness rest on the parts of the body that are vibrating or in where there is sensation resulting from the practice. That's the only kind of instruction in terms of attention or awareness. So it's something like this. So let's do that together. Deep breath. Last breath. Sensing into the echoes or vibrations of that sound. Letting the awareness penetrate the body to notice how is it in the body? What sensations are most prominent? You gently connect with any emotions that might be present. And is there some sense of the attitude of the mind, the mood of the mind that's coloring how you're meeting this moment? And then inviting you to take a few intentionally deeper breaths. And on the exhale, softening. Each exhale can be an invitation to soften the body, inviting any areas where you hold tension to gently begin to release. And maybe there's some sense of softening in the mind. Maybe that's less effort. Maybe that's letting go of any agenda. Letting the awareness rest on the feeling of the breath, moving in and out of the body. The sense of withdrawing our engagement, simplifying our engagement to just this one thing, breathing in, knowing, feeling, sensing the in-breath, breathing out, knowing, feeling, sensing the out-breath. And the body can continue to soften. And just enough effort to kind of keep nudging the attention in the direction of the breath. Awareness doesn't have to reach out for anything. There can be a sense that experience is just coming to us. We're receiving this flow of sensations from the breathing body. And whenever you notice that the attention has wandered from your breath, it's usually because we're captured by some thought. Just letting that thought be and beginning again. Resting the attention on the feeling of the breath, moving in and out of the body. And everything else just fades into the background. Body continues to relax. This supports our steadying process. Effort continues to be gentle. And then invoking some sense of the half smile of the Buddha, either externally or internally. Smile of contentment, a smile that welcomes this moment, however it might be. So many ways to be connected to breathing. You might feel it in the belly. You might feel it in the chest. Maybe some air at the upper lip, place that's often favored because it's subtle, requires more attunement. Maybe there's a sense of tracing the breath through various parts of the body. Might be more holistic, including sensations at the back of the body, sensations in the shoulders of the neck. Could be more energetic, sensing the movement of energy along with the breath. Often we can feel the inhale as a kind of energizing movement, and the exhale as a kind of relaxing movement. Maybe there's a sense of the whole body breathing, as if every cell in the body were breathing in unison. So staying connected to the breath in whatever way feels most accessible, most easeful, most pleasant. And however you're connected to the breath, breathing in, knowing the in breath, breathing out, knowing the out breath. Always useful to periodically notice the attitude of the mind. Mind judgmental? Is the mind trying to solve a problem? Maybe just scattered, distracted. And then refreshing the sense of connection with the breath. when there's nowhere to go and nothing to get or get rid of, no one you have to be, then the practice can be restful. And now bringing to mind something that you're grateful for. If it's another being, you might sense into what it's like to be in their presence. Or at some circumstance, imagining it in your mind's eye as best you're able. And then connecting with gratitude as a feeling in the body. Notice where gratitude resides in the body. The energetic quality of experience of gratitude. Feeling tones usually quite pleasant and uplifting. Another version of this inner smile. And if gratitude has a shape in the body, if it's bounded in some way, you might imagine as if the boundaries of gratitude were slowly expanding. Well, this energy can suffuse more and more of the body. And savoring the feeling of gratitude. Let it be uplifting and nourishing. A moment, I'll ring the bell 3 times to indicate the transition. But seeing if you can maintain the same sense of presence, the same sense of embodiment, maybe even continuing the practice of being aware of the breathing body. So everyone, free to move around a little bit, give the body what it's asking for. So this is the third in a 4-part series exploring the topic of the self. Um, and I think it's one of the misunderstood uh, topics or themes in Buddhist practice. You hear things like there is no self. Um, but the Buddha went out of his way to not take a position on the existence of self. First class, we talked about the wanderer Vacchagotta. He walks in, gets an audience with the Buddha, and he says, "Is there self?" And the Buddha does not respond. And then he says, "Is there no self?" And the Buddha doesn't respond. And then Vacchagotta gets up and leaves. Um, and Ananda, the Buddha's chief of staff, asked him, why didn't you answer this question? I came all this way, see you. Like, it's kind of a big deal to get an audience with the Buddha. And kind of giving them silent treatment. And Buddha basically said that to take a position on this would create a thicket of views, a thorny crown of views, a tangle of views. You know, like whole paragraph of describing the views that one would adopt when taking a position on the existence of self. He said, I don't take a position on that. But what he did take position on, famously, is there is suffering. Well, the seminal insight of the Buddha that this human existence has its bumps. It's bumpy. Dukkha, the Pali word, means an axle off kilter. So, like this nature of this life, we're subject to lots of bumps. Body is fragile, hearts are fragile, body is inevitably going to age, get sick, and die. Um, I've said before, I actually found hearing these words a long time ago now and feeling relief because I've been harboring under the worldview that anytime I was experiencing a moment of suffering, a moment of distress, a moment of reactivity, that it was some personal failing or some failure to execute some strategy in the right way. I'm taking it very personally, taking a lot of responsibility for those very human moments that we inevitably experience. Um, and the way it was explained to me is by a guy who's sort of early tech person, I guess, that suffering is a feature of this life, not a bug. And it's actually a very important feature because it becomes the impetus for um, whatever we want to do to free ourselves from this cycle of suffering again and again and again. So the Buddha took this position. There is suffering, and that's the insight, the realization, and then suffering is to be known as the practice instruction. Kind of forms the whole basis for this whole undertaking of insight meditation that uh, we first work to get the mind a little bit settled, a little bit quiet, like we did today, focusing the mind on something steady. When the mind is a little bit steady, we open to the universe of experience, and inevitably, the things that distress us begin to show up. Um, the second noble truth was that, which the Buddha did take position on, was that our suffering is caused by clinging and aversion. So in this process of turning towards that which distresses us, we begin to see, what is it that I'm clinging to in this moment? Or what could be released in this moment that would quell this reactivity? And then there's a whole path of practice that kind of illuminates the way in which we can do this. So so I'm still summarizing from what we've covered thus far. So we talked about how, there's kind of like different realities. One reality is um, sometimes it's posited as all things are empty of any inherent characteristic. And the analogy that's used for this is the analogy of a chariot, or I was updated to say a car. So you look at a car, what is a car? Where's the essence of the thing that makes it a car? Is it in the steering wheel? Well, probably not, because we've got cars driving themselves. Is it in the upholstery? Is it in the wheels? I grew up in Alabama. You see lots of cars on blocks, no wheels. You still refer to that as a car. And it turns out you can't really point to any part of this series of connected pieces that is the intrinsic carness of that thing. Because car is a conceptual overlay. Car is a concept, it's a map of reality, but the map is always an approximation of the territory. So the Buddha made the same analogy with, the self. And when he talked about itself, there were sort of some characteristics that he had said, if there's a self, the self should have these characteristics. And one of them is a sense of stability or continuity. This seems intuitive. Like I have some sense of meanness that's the same right now than it was my earliest memories at age 4. Like I think this is a common experience for people. There's a sense of some stability to this concept of me, myself. Uh, he said the self should have some control or agency. I mean, this is also kind of intuitive because we go around the world, we think we're making decisions, we're doing things, we're um, making things happen for obvious ways in which we do have autonomy over our body. Um, and then the Buddha said, then this is based more on the worldview at the time, that a self should be associated with some like pleasure or joy. And because the Brahmanic religions at the time, and still today, were positing that there's this capital S self, Atman, that and spiritual practice was all about unification or reunification with this ultimate self. That was their version of awakening or enlightenment, and that's associated with a lot of uh, good goodness, good feelings. Um, so self should have these characteristics. It should be, like associated with joy and pleasure. It should be more or less continuous, stable, and should have a sense of agency. So when you look at the Buddha's map for what it is to be a human being, he described this human experience as 5 processes. They're called the 5 khandas. This word khanda means literally like heap or pile or bundle. And the 5, sometimes we call them aggregates also. Aggregate like, sand and gravel are aggregates that come together to form concrete. And they are form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. So form is physical form. Form is contact with sight, sounds, smells, tastes, touch. Feeling turns out to be a huge area of exploration in Buddhist practice. Feeling is simply the experience of pleasant, unpleasant, or neither that seems to co-arise with every sense contact impression. So we see a sight, almost immediately we have some sense of pleasant, unpleasant, couldn't care less. Um, Perception, this is the ability of the mind to recognize and label things. So I hold this up and you can see that it's a bell. Maybe the word bell pops into your mind. I hold up a clock. Maybe the word clock pops into your mind. We know these things. Um, and famously, our perception could get confused. The example the Buddha used is, if it's dark and you see something in the road and first you think it's a snake and then you realize it's coiled up rope. Then I've had the experience where then no, it's a snake. Wait, it's rope. No, it's snake. Like our perception can get easily fooled. This is where bias and kind of um, preconceived notions come into play in our experience. Uh, and then volitional formations is a weird sounding translation for the word sankhara, which is all the things that influence the next decision we're going to make, the next volitional action we're going to take actions of body, speech, and mind. So it's what you're thinking, all the things, all the objects of the mind, maybe emotions are in there, our conditioning that comes from our upbringing, from the culture we're raised in, maybe from religious traditions. So like the way we've been patterned and conditioned that really is powerful influence on every decision that we're making. And then consciousness is the field in which all experience is happening. Oh. And actually, if you think about it, everything that we experience in what we call human life is one of six things arising in consciousness: sight, sound, smells, tastes, touch, or thoughts, impressions running in the mind. This is why this is why I so emphasize the attitude of the mind, because we change the attitude of the mind, we change the whole world, we change everything. Because everything is entering into our awareness through this consciousness and constantly arising and falling, rising and passing away, rising and passing away. So the Buddha applied these tests to each of these five khandas, these five heaps. You know, do you have some control? Is it stable, permanent? And is there pleasure associated with it? A spoiler alert is that he called these the five aggregates of clinging. So all of them are sources of suffering. So you could just rule out that first test. They don't provide any lasting basis for any kind of satisfaction. Um, and by and large, we don't control them. We don't control our physical form, and we can influence it by, what we eat or how we use the body, exercise, or we don't. But the Buddha said, if you had control over your form, you would say, well, let my form be thus. And then your form would be thus. Even though the perception of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral arises in the mind, we don't really control it. It's sort of, it's there. We have our likes and dislikes. I say accordion music. Probably everyone has an opinion. Maybe some of you are indifferent. Pizza on pineapple, pineapple on pizza, electronic dance music. Um, and the same rule applies for all of them. Like basically, when you look at these components of human experience, like we look at the components of a car or a chariot, can't find any essential self that has these qualities of autonomy and consistency and some pleasure associated with them. So that was the first two sessions. Now, the third one, I wanted to talk about, uh, I like the sense of self arises from activities of the mind. So I alluded to this the other day when I said, like think about where your sense of self is in a moment of standing at the top of a mountain with a beautiful vista or a sunset or some moment of awe or connection in nature, some moment of uh, intimate connection with another being. Had this with our neighbor's cat this morning, where it's just like we were so in sync that wasn't like me trying to control the cat or the cat trying to control me. It was just a sense of self abates in those kinds of situations. And those situations are quite pleasant. There's not, when there's not a lot of selfing going on, um, it's more peaceful. I was at Spirit Rock Meditation Center where I teach often, and there's an evening where I was scheduled to give the Dhamma talk, and it's like 110 people in the room. If you're prone to any anxiety about public speaking. It's a thing, and it kind of feels like it's high stakes because people are on retreat, they're very sensitive, and you know, but I've been doing it long enough that I'm pretty comfortable. And I'm walking in to give the talk, and somebody motions for me to come over. We're all in noble silence, and I bend down, and I put my ear close to their mouth, and they say, "This better be good." And I was in on the joke. I laughed. I thought it was funny. I appreciated actually that there was humor on retreat where things can get sort of like, you're doing the practice, you're turning towards the things that cause suffering, and it can get sort of like bleak or this feeling of trudging through the mud. So it's very happy to see someone cracking a joke. And then it happened like, oh, gee, like maybe I should have prepared more. I don't know if this is really going to be good. This is going to be the worst talk ever given in the history of Spirit Rock. I'll put up a plaque in my honor. And then I'm not normally prone to anxiety, but I could feel my heart pounding out of my chest and sweat forming on my brow. My hands were all clammy, and some full-blown reaction to this innocent, humorous comment. And the nice thing about being on retreat is that there's some mindfulness available. So I was very aware of what was happening. I actually dropped in a little mental note to myself, which was, there's a lot of selfing going on here. Like I could see that I was taking birth in a kind of identity that needed to be protected. The identity of being whatever, a good Dhamma teacher, or giving a good talk. Um, and that clinging to that identity, even in this sort of like simple, subtle way, was causing a whole cascade of suffering, a whole cascade of reactions. But when mindfulness is available, then we just do the practice. We turn toward the thing that is causing distress. So I saw the thought patterns, selfing thought patterns, turned my attention away from that, came to the generalized feeling of anxiety, butterflies in the stomach, and, and then even more discrete experiences at the level of the body, the clenching of the jaw, the shoulders were a little hiked up, can soften them, even the heart beating rapidly, a little sweat forming on the brow. And a minute or two of that kind of uh, presence of mind, then the body just tends to regulate itself. Like the our mind, our body, this whole system wants to be in stasis, wants to be in equilibrium. Like we know this about the body physiologically. If I were to run across a field, there'd be all kinds of activation, respiration, heartbeat, blood pressure, like hormones. And we also know with like essentially 100% certainty that if we create the conditions, the body will regulate itself. So basically stopping. and uh, and we could say I regulated myself, but that would be just like a manner of speaking. It's actually like nature moving through us, doing what nature does, which is find nature of the body, at least, is to find equilibrium. The nature of the mind, the heart, so it's sort of the same. Um, we're not feeding the source of the anxiety, which we primarily do by engaging in the thinking. Like if I had less mindfulness, I might have just kept going on that train of thought, gathering more evidence from past experience about how I'm going to fall flat on my face, and uh, just making it worse rather than allowing nature to take its course. So the Buddha described three selfing activities. Taking something as mine, taking something as me. This might have been what it was kind of a little bit what was happening in my example as I was, taking ownership of a certain me that had to perform well. Um, Taking something as my essence. It's a little bit esoteric, but I'll mention it anyway. Craving for existence. And each corresponds to a certain kind of clinging. It's actually that the sense of self or selfing arises when there's some clinging. And well, the thing the Buddha took a very clear position on is that clinging is the source of our suffering. So anytime there's an activity of selfing, it's intimately connected with some sort of suffering. Conceit is another activity of the mind. Conceit is just any kind of comparison. Better than, worse than, same as. And the first time I heard this, I was like, well, better than, same as, worse than, that covers the whole gamut. So what's left? And what's left is that we don't even engage in the comparison in the first place. So we know the pitfall of being overly attached to anything we perceive as mine, physical possessions, other people, animals, my job, my career, my status, my body, my youth, that when that thing changes, as it inevitably will, we can suffer. Ajahn Chah, the Thai forest master, famously had a favorite mug. It was a mug or a glass, but he had a favorite glass, and he was always drinking that glass and really enjoying it. And when the Westerners started showing up in the late 60s, they were very, some people say mischievous. Uh, I might use a different word, but they accused him basically of being attached to this mug. Like, you're like telling us, don't cling, give up clinging, give up loving and hating. It's like the first thing that Ajahn Chah says in most of his Dhamma talks. And so he said, for me, this glass is already broken. I enjoy it. I drink out of it. It holds my water admirably, sometimes even reflecting the sun in beautiful ways. If I tap it, it has a lively ring to it. But when I put the glass on the shelf and the wind knocks it over, or my elbow brushes it off the table and it falls to the ground and shatters, I'll say, of course. When I understand that the glass is already broken, there's no suffering when the glass is lost. And this is where the I found the contemplations on death to be extremely helpful. Whole part of the Buddha's teaching, one of the ways of establishing mindfulness is involves contemplations of corpses, various states of decay. It's not that popular in the West. This doesn't sort of fit our sensibility in a certain kind of way. But another version of that is a chant that I have done often. There was one year where I did it every day, and it's and I am of the nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. I am the nature to sicken. I have not gone beyond sickness. I am the nature to die. I have not gone beyond dying. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will soon become otherwise, will become separated from me. It's like like you say, the harsh truth of what it is to be in this realm. And then it ends on a kind of upbeat note. It's like I'm the owner of my karma, heir of my karma, supported by my karma. Um, and karma is action. So we can't control the inevitability of what it is to be human in a human body, but we can influence the next moment by acting in ways that are more more wise and more likely to lead to our own benefit and the benefit of others. There's an app for this. It's called We Croak. And 5 times a day, you get a little message. I get it on my watch, and it says, don't forget you're going to die. And I have found this to be extremely helpful because usually when I get that notification, I'm involved in some kind of drama, some kind of inner drama, some sort of complaint about the way things are, something I'm in contention with. And it's clarifying to remember that, like the question I ask myself, is this something that I'm going to be concerned about when I'm in my, taking my last breath? And the answer is almost always no. Gives me a little like reprieve from whatever activity is taking place. Attachment to views. This is another form of selfing. This is something we see so much operating in our society now that people are like, like identifying with, making their identity out of their views, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on. Um, Attachment to views is the thing that we go to war about. Um, and Trudy Goodman, our founder of Inside LA, she always used to say, "Would you rather be right, or would you rather be free?" Also found that to be helpful when I'm clinging to the Buddha famously said, "Those who cling to perceptions and views wander about the world, offending people." So one more thing, and then I'll end it, open up discussion. Is just say that like sometimes the teaching is a little misunderstood to suggest that we need to get rid of something, um, get rid of the self, diminish the self in some way to make ourselves smaller, to be a nobody. I sometimes hear practitioners, mostly Zen practitioners, they talk about crushing the ego. Um, but actually, that's another activity of selfing, trying to measure ourselves against some ideal. It's that conceit again. I once went to a spiritual community where they had a practice. They had a lot of weird practices, but they had a practice that was like not to use I, me, or mine. And it's kind of hard to do. And so it ends up just being really absurd. Like having entered the dining room, food was consumed, enjoyment was experienced. It's not particularly helpful. Also, the view of not self, the related view of emptiness that I've alluded to, uh, can be a way to paper over or spiritually bypass. Like we could say that uh, identity is empty, it's just a concept, but identity is not empty for the racist or the misogynist or the homophobe. The effects of those views have really powerful, pernicious effects in the world. We could also say that the I, that is the one impacted by racism, homophobia, ageism, misogyny, any other oppressive regime we want to think of, that I has the characteristic of not self. So what's the big deal? And you will hear sometimes teachers nudging people in that direction. And I think it's a big caution flag. Um, it's sort of like trying to leapfrog over the relative into the absolute. There's two ways of seeing the same thing. One is the seeing that these things are all empty of any inherent characteristic, concepts created in the mind. And then there's the very real reality that they have these harmful effects on our being. So this the sense of not self being a liberative teaching really only happens when there is a kind of strong sense of self that's developed, a strong sense of autonomy, a strong sense of the wounds that society may have inflicted on us or our experience may have inflicted on us have been healed in some way. Um, and same for these other characteristics that point to the seminal insights, the insight of impermanence, permanence, when you fully step into it, not as a conceptual understanding, but as like a stark realization that nothing is stable, everything is quicksand. It's just, it's very shocking and can be destabilizing. So the practice encourages us to cultivate stability, like we did at the beginning of the evening, to cultivate this sense of stability. When there's enough stability, then the fact that things are in flux becomes more liberative and less shocking. And then the same thing with there is suffering. You know, it's a characteristic of all these phenomena. But if all we know is suffering, then somebody says all things are suffering. It's like it's not particularly helpful. So we cultivate some sense of well-being in the practice. It's like the balancing out. And this is why the human realm is said to be the most optimal for awakening, because there's um, enough suffering to be motivated to practice to free ourselves from this cycle of samsara. But for most of us, not so much that it becomes impossible. Um, Buddhist cosmology is talking about these heaven realms, and heaven realms is very difficult to awaken because every desire that you have instantly materializes. There's no pain in that. There's no, the body is very ethereal and fine. There's no pain. So you can spend eons in this, very pleasant state, but then not free yourself from the cycle of rebirth. So I'm going to stop there and just open it up to any comments, reflections, or questions. I know it was a lot. This was an experiment to see what it would be like to do a series for a sitting group. But I look around the room and I see, like every week it's different people. So I kind of end up doing the same thing 4 times.